Hello, England. My name's Jeremy Dineen. I'm the chief winemaker of Josef Chromy Wines in the Tamar Valley in Tasmania. With me is my friend Rebecca Duffy from Holm Oak Wines at the northern end of the Tamar Valley. And you may notice we have an empty seat here. We are also waiting for our friend and colleague Peter Caldwell from Dalrymple Wines, who will eventually get here and I'm sure tell you lovely things about his wine and about Tasmania. Hey!
Hey, guys!
As you've on cue.
Sorry. Oh, thanks, cheers. Sorry,
that wasn't staged. Now, obviously, you can see and hopefully hear us. We can't see you, there'll be a bunch of questions. Please shoot them through via the app, and we will attempt to answer them during the course of the evening. But maybe I'll set the scene a bit about Tasmania. I guess I've already introduced Beck and you just as you arrived, Pete. There's a bunch of information in the little booklet you will have received with the wines, and I'm sure the links via PDF. So I'm not going to cover everything that you've already got there in front of you. I'll tell you a little bit of a story about Tasmania. The stats will tell you that we are a small island off to the far south of Australia. We sit between 41 and 43 degrees south. We are the 26th largest island in the world, which is your useless piece of trivia for the day. We have a multitude of different soils, different regions, different microclimates within the island, and we'll explore a few of those with the 6 wines that we've got here today. The history of Tasmanian wine is perhaps a bit longer than most people will realise. The second vineyard in Australia was actually planted in Tasmania, in literally just outside of Hobart, the capital city. But we had a long hiatus from about 1850 to 1950. There were no vineyards in the state. So what you're going to see and taste now is, I guess, the reinvigoration of Tasmanian wine. The modern vineyards, most of which here have been around for at least 20 years. Some a little longer, some a little younger. I don't want to speak at a camera for the whole evening, so I would really, really encourage all of you to send your questions through as we go through. Both Beck, Pete, and myself, we'd rather let you know the answers to your questions than just speak a bunch of boring facts about Tasmania. But look, I guess the stats about temperature, the stats about rainfall, all those things are in your guide. I don't want to cover those. What I want to tell you is this is a pretty special place to grow grapes and make wine. We have some of the most ancient soils on the planet. We are unique in our location. We are maybe not the furthest south location in the terms of grape growing. But what defines Tasmania is its status as an island. We have literally nothing to the west of Tasmania for about 14,000 kilometres until you hit Argentina. Nothing to the south until you hit Antarctica. We're over 260 kilometres to the south of Australia. So we are very remote. The climate and the temperature is defined by our island status. The west coast is very wet, very rugged, very wild, the cleanest air on the planet, some of the wildest weather on the planet. But the east coast, quite mild. The mountain ranges through the centre tend to catch all of that rain, and so we have this moderate, temperate climate that allows us to grow grapes pretty much from almost a dead line through the centre of the state to the east. And we will see 6 wines from 6 quite different places around the state. Is there anything that I've missed in
Oh,
that?
no, I was only going from a perspective. If you put us, I mean, you may know New Zealand more than you know Tassie. And I was thinking, I've always told people, if you put us on top of New Zealand, we sit somewhere between the top around Martinborough down to sort of Kaikoura.
Yeah.
If that's more familiar with people who might know New Zealand more than Tassie, that's sort of where we sit. And I think probably similar sort of wines in a lot of ways, but very different soils and quite a lot. But we still have that West Coast wetness and the dry East Coast, which New Zealand also sort of has. But that sort of helps. I've found to give something a little bit connection to somewhere else down in our part of the world.
Very much, and to give you that perspective, the three of us are sitting here in Launceston, so the southern end of the Tamar Valley. We are exactly the same latitude now as Blenheim in the centre of Marlborough. And some of the wines that we will see are from around Hobart or the Coal Valley, and that is exactly the same latitude as Christchurch. So sort of halfway down the South Island of New Zealand.
Oh, yeah.
You need to start something the table. All right, I'm reading the questions while you guys are talking. We do have a couple of questions.
Good question. Yes.
My eyes aren't good enough to read questions that far away, so I'm sure Cheryl Lee will.
Yes. So hello, UK and Scotland. We have a question about why there was a 100-year gap from 1850.
So, like most colonies, people planted grapes and did various things wherever they happened to land. And so there were a few vineyards in Tasmania. There was actually one in the 1820s, only about 15 kilometres from where we're sitting, that was growing a variety called Black Cluster, which we all know now better as Pinot Noir. So there were people growing even the right types of grapes back in the 1820s. But by the 1850s, viticulture pretty much died out in Tasmania because it wasn't a very viable financial proposition. You could make more money from sheep, from wool. A lot of the people who had originally come and settled in Tasmania moved to Victoria to chase the gold rush. So it really was about the lack of opportunity for viticulture and possibly the lack of expertise as well. So then in the 1950s, two Fresh immigrants, an Italian called Claudio Alcorso and a Frenchman called Jean Maguet, started vineyards at different ends of the state. And that was really the start of the reinvigoration of Tasmania's modern viticulture. And it wasn't until the sort of mid to late 70s that there were some, more vineyards of scale, and then mid 90s to 2000.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And also the wine population was drinking bigger wines too. I mean, cool climate wines were hardly on the palate of people who were drinking rum and port and sherry and big style wines. So it was, I know in the early days of, when I was working in Queensbrook, even they're trying to do Cabernet, and it was just impossible to grow Cabernet in that part. But that was driven by the fact that that's what the market was trying to, wanting to buy and drink. So I think, the emergence of cool climate styles have been a big part of it too.
And also, I mean, when I studied at Roseworthy, a little bit after you, but the conventional wisdom in Australia was Tasmania was too bloody cold to grow grapes. The people who were lecturing us about how to grow grapes and make wine kind of laughed when we said we wanted to make wine in Tassie.
I do, Peter Dry.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Now everybody wants to be here.
Exactly right.
Some more questions? Cheryl?
We do. So Robert Joseph mentioned that the windiness of Tasmania may have been perhaps a potential issue to its progress in the 80s and 90s.
So the West Coast is incredibly windy, and you couldn't grow any grapes on the West Coast, and there are other parts of the South and the North that are also pretty windy. But most of the East Coast is relatively sheltered. Now, all things are relative.
That's right.
The wind also helps to dry out the grapes when it rains, so it's actually can be a positive.
That's true. Yeah.
but also I've been making wine in Tassie for about 20 years now, and the vintages, without doubt, are warmer now than they were 20 years ago.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, been a big change, and I think people have also viticulture's hard in Tassie. I think you look at the rest of Australia, viticulture is reasonably easy in the fact that you don't have as many challenges, and I think that doesn't help people when they come and they find it could be quite diseases and things can be quite hard to deal with for a lot of people. And I think that would have balked a lot of the early ones who have come down to have a go. I think that took a long time, unless the Europeans were part of it, to understand how hard it is to grow grapes in cool climates. It takes a real persistence challenge.
There's a lot more labour, a lot more attention to detail required in the vineyard, and nothing worth doing is generally easy, is it?
No, nothing at all. That's kills you sometimes, though.
Some more questions? Or
we have a couple of questions with regards to individual wine growing areas and the vintages, which I think we'll probably talk about.
We might cover the growing areas and the vintages as we go through the wines, but we've been talking for how long now? 10 minutes.
We're up to 13.
Yeah, so it's probably about time to taste the wine. I'm sure you've had enough of me talking, except I'm going to talk about the first one. Sorry, bad luck, you guys. The first wine that we would like you to try is the Tolpuddle Pinot. So this is a vineyard that I actually do know a little bit about, because many years ago I actually used to buy some grapes and make some wine from this vineyard, and it was a vineyard that was largely set up to sell grapes, and more recently it's been purchased by Shaw & Smith, who are probably better known as an Adelaide Hills producer. But they have put an incredible amount of effort into trying to realise the potential of this vineyard. So this vineyard is in the Coal River Valley, between 15 and 20 minutes just outside of Hobart. Here we go. I've got that. Go, Pete. Yes. So, unfortunately, our technology is not. Thanks, Pete. Our technology has not allowed us to put a map on the screen for you. We are sitting right here. This is where the three of us are right now. About 198 kilometres to our south is Hobart, the capital city of Tasmania, and a little bit to the east there is Richmond. Yeah. Okay. So the camera's mirrored. So I am pointing to the east, even though it looks to the west. Through here in Richmond is the Coal River Valley. So one of the drier parts of the state. So Hobart sits in the shadow of Mount Wellington. So we were talking about the wind, the rain, the wild weather coming across from the west. The mountain ranges through the centre of Tasmania catch most of that. So here's your second useless fact for the day. Hobart is the second driest capital city in Australia. So the only capital city in the rest of Australia that has lower rainfall is Adelaide. So Hobart's rainfall, 550 to 600 mils. The Coal River Valley, where Pete has a vineyard, about 500, and your vineyard maybe about 450 for the past couple of years. Even less, So it's actually, despite being very southerly, very cool, it's quite a dry area. So a very reliable area for growing grapes. And this particular vineyard sits on this sort of sandy silica soil, and traditionally produced grapes for sparkling wine that they were selling to various different companies. But since Shaw & Smith have taken it over, they've put a huge amount of effort into changing the architecture, the canopy, really making sure that they've got the best possible situation for growing grapes for table wine, for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And for me, the classic characteristics of the Coal Valley are perhaps slightly finer tannins than you'll see on the East Coast or in the Tamar Valley, a little bit more perfume, more sort of floral characters in the Pinot fruit, and a very subtle power, but power and elegance. It's a fantastic place to grow Pinot, and I know we're not talking about Riesling, but it's probably one of the best places on the planet to grow Riesling too.
Agree.
Yeah, I'm not going to attempt to tell you what you should be tasting in the Tolpuddle Pinot. Suffice to say that I think that the team at Shaw and Smith have made great strides with this vineyard and are producing absolutely outstanding Pinots, and have done so pretty much every year from when they purchased it.
Absolutely, no, a welcome member into our little family.
Yes.
Fantastic. A great expression.
You get your spittoon if you want, but
Thanks for the thought. I'll try.
It's not 10 o'clock in the morning here, of course. It's 9 o'clock in the evening, so I'm not going to spit.
No.
And all the Tasmanian produce in front of you is not just for display. We are going to eat this.
That's true.
So that's a quick rundown of the Culver Valley and the Tolpuddle Pinot. I think the winemaking notes are in the
Yes,
the booklet.
that's right, in the booklet.
So
That's true.
I don't really need to repeat that unless there's particular questions.
Oh, some details about clones.
Yeah.
Was there anything about that?
So it's been probably 15 years since I made any wine from this vineyard, so that I think it's the clonal mix in the booklet. So traditionally this vineyard was 114, 115, D5V12 and G5V15, with a little bit of Mariahfield as well, I think.
Yeah, there was Mariah, because we've taken some fruit from here,
Yeah.
and we've taken that, the 114 and D5V12.
Yeah.
So I know that much now.
So I know that they've been working on improving some of the clonal selection, expanding it so they have a bit more variety. But I would have to defer to Adam Wadowitz or Dave Lemire to actually answer those questions. So yeah, but we can chase it up, and Cheryl Lee will email that answer because she's
What about?
Yeah. Far more attention to detail than me.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
So should we move to wine number 2?
Unless there's another question about Cold Valley.
Yeah.
What about just a little bit of an overview of the 2018 vintage while we're looking at 3 wines from that vintage?
Oh, that's a good point.
Okay. Do you want to start or do you want me?
Oh, well, you can go.
I've spoken a lot.
You might have to spell. I can only say from the, I think in 18, for most people, I mean, in any cool plant, we've changed from year to year, and it's been 17 was for me quite a cool year and low yields, and I was just looking at all the data today, actually, all the weather data, and looking at that between the 18 and 18 was probably out of the box. I think it's probably as far as a warm, dry year, good spring, and it was almost warm all the way from spring right through into autumn. I don't think there was really anyone that had many concerns with 18 at all. Made a wine with big volume and great power, and I think if you did everything right and kept your yields right, you actually ended up with wines with great finesse as well. And I think it's for most people it was just a lovely year where everything just went really well, and people really put some great runs on the board with their wines. And I think Tassie as well, was another solid backup wine for another great vintage. And I think, but very different to say 17 before, which was quite cool, and
19
quite different, and then 19 afterwards. So it is, it was really good. And I think most people would see 18 as being across the board a very solid year. Not many people had many issues with it at all in any of the regions that I know of.
No,
I
think the 18s were definitely much higher yielding than 17, which was tiny. But I think the good thing that came out of 18 was that they were really lovely, elegant, bright, juicy, quite floral, aromatic wines compared to 17, which were obviously darker and denser and had more structure. And I really like the 18s because they do have that elegance about them, and that really lovely fine tannin structure. And the higher yields generally came from more smaller berries than less larger berries. So you still have that tannin structure, but really lovely elegance, whereas 16, similar kind of yields at our vineyard, but quite different wines because in 16 we have much sort of bigger sized berries. So it's interesting just those small differences that can make quite a difference, even though the yields might be similar.
Yeah,
so to the other.
Yeah, I think 18 generally warm, like across the board, quite dry. There was no trouble ripening grapes in 2018. Similar yields, like Beck said, to 2016, similar temperature, but I think wines that had a bit more fruit power and extract. In a lot of ways, quite similar to the decade before, 2008, another year which was warm, dry, and actually some wines that offered a lot of generosity of fruit very early on. The thing that defines for me 2008, 16, and 18 is the acidity level is a bit lower than you'd normally see in Tasmania. So these wines are perhaps like a little more approachable, like as soon as they're bottled, than some of the others. The 17s, and we'll talk a bit more about 17 in a minute, but 17's more tannin and more acidity and more structure.
Yeah, I think 18 as well is a wine that will age well for those people who did well with it. Where I think 16, like you're saying, Beck, it sort of looked good, but then it just sort of flowered and then bloomed and died a little bit because of that. Like you're saying, those big berries just didn't have extract to hold them together.
No, that's right.
So that's but it's all part of what we've learned to work with in Tassie. I think. Yeah. So that was 18,
16, and 18. Though both excellent for sparkling as well. Those bigger yields make sparkling grapes perform like beautifully. Yeah.
Who cares about sparkling, Jess? So. I don't make it.
Some of us make sparkling, Pete. Some of us actually even enjoy drinking it too.
That's good. What was the wine number 2? I'm just
Yep. So
what happened to my?
It's behind you, mate.
Yeah.
Is that you?
That's right.
all right, so I'm going to have a little bit of a chat about the Tamar Ridge Pinot Noir. So Tamar Ridge is located very near to my vineyard. They're only 5 k's around the road, and we're up in the Tamar Valley north of Launceston. So if you look on your map of Tasmania that you have in your notes somewhere, you'll see Region 2, which is the Tamar. We're about 40 k's north of Launceston. There's a little bit where we sort of stick out into the river, and Tamar Ridge not quite as close to the river as what we are. So, but still quite similar sites. And interestingly, with these 2 wines, having a chat to Tom, the winemaker today, quite similarly made, and also similar clone mix as well. So the 2018 Tamar Ridge is predominantly D4V2, which is a Pommard clone, and MV6, which is more of an Australian clone. I'm sure you're probably familiar with those 2, but let me know if you need any more details on those. So with this wine, it's 15% whole bunch. And I think you can immediately see between the Tolpuddle, which I think does have a chunk of whole bunch as well, 40%. Yeah. This one is a little bit more earthy and savoury, and you don't get as much of that sort of bright aromatic fruit. And that's probably a little bit of a characteristic of our part of the Tamar, which is relatively warm. Our elevation's only about 50 metres above sea level, so pretty much in the valley floor in the Tamar. So it is quite a warm site. Unlike the Cold Valley, though, it is much wetter. We tend to get closer to that 700 to 750 mils of rain in our end of the Tamar. So disease pressure is always an issue at both of our vineyards, but that sort of high humidity that we have and being close to the water can also give us other benefits as well. So yeah, pretty conventionally made, the Tamar Ridge. It's all made in small batch fermenters, sort of 3 to 5 tonnes in size. It's pressed to oak for about 10 months and then bottled. So really trying to capture the site characteristics in this wine.
Any questions, Sharon?
We have questions around volumes of these wines, which is perhaps worth talking about.
Some more, a little bit less.
So the Cayena vineyard is 134 hectares in size, so it's actually the second largest vineyard in Tasmania. and about half of it is planted to Pinot. So obviously not all of that Pinot goes into this wine. And in 2018, they made a reserve wine as well as this from that vineyard. And then I'm sure if there's parcels of fruit that might end up in sort of Devil's Corner as well from that vineyard. But so you're looking at 70 hectares of Pinot from that site. So it is a fair amount of wine, but I'm not exactly sure of the case volumes of that wine. But it'd be relatively large, particularly compared to Tolpuddle, which I think is around that 1,000 to 2,000 case mark.
Do they have prices and stuff?
Yes.
Yeah,
they've got UK prices.
Okay.
So much smaller quantities of the Tolpuddle than the Tamar Ridge. Yeah. So while we're talking about sort of our area, I'll move on to the Holm Oak Pinot as well. So it's also 2018, which is obviously from my vineyard. So I can give you a little bit of background about us. We're probably one of the smaller producers in this lineup. Our vineyard's about 15 hectares in size. My husband and I run it together, so I make the wines, and Tim, my husband, is a grape grower. So it's nice to be able to have that, I guess, that expertise in those two areas. It's probably not something that you see a lot of with husband and wife teams in the wine industry down here in Tassie. So it's nice to be able to get him to have full control over the vineyard. He loves growing grapes. We were talking about people coming down from the mainland and finding it very difficult to grow grapes down here, and he certainly encountered that when he moved down from Swan Hill, which is on the Murray River in northern Victoria, so much more used to that broadacre, no rocks. There's a lot of rocks in our vineyard. So any land that we've developed over the last sort of 14 years that we've been there, we've had to work pretty hard to actually get the land ready to plant and then to get the vines and the posts in the ground. So we are right on the valley floor, pretty warm site for Tasmania, but means we can make some really sort of generous styles of wine. Like Pete was saying, there was Cabernet planted in the early days, and at our vineyard that was no different. So it was established in 1983, our vineyard, and the first vines that were planted there were Cabernet. Like Pete was saying, nobody in the early 80s in Australia was drinking Pinot. They probably didn't really know what it was, and like a lot of vineyards in Australia, was established by a lawyer, and so Cabernet was what everybody was drinking, and that's what was planted at our vineyard as well. So we actually make 4 different Pinots, and this is the second in the range. So we have the Protégé, which is our entry level, then the Estate Pinot, then we have the Wizard Pinot, which is our reserve Pinot, and a hot shot that sits above that. So Pinot is what we really love doing, and about half of our vineyard, even though much smaller than Tamar Ridge, is also planted to Pinot. I do have the clones and the breakdown on your notes there. So it's something that we've been working quite hard on over the last 14 years that I've been there. Originally, we only had D5 V12, which is sort of an upright clone used more for sparkling winemaking, and over the years we've planted a lot more of the newer for Australia clones as well. And I think it's really interesting, as just a sort of a bit of an aside, as a winemaker, you only get like one shot every year to make your wine. So I've been making wine down here in Tassie for 14 years, which kind of seems like a long time, but we've really only had 14 goes at making these wines. And so with Pinot, you have like lots of different blocks and lots of different clones and lots of different options in terms of winemaking. So trying to work out what to do with those different parcels of fruit and how to get the best out of those, and how to then deal with the climatic challenges that you face. So making wine in a cool climate is lots of fun, but really challenging. And it's good to see these wines getting bottled, but you can always think, what am I going to do next year? And particularly like making the 4 different wines, it's a really fantastic place to make wine, but also quite challenging as well.
Just for those of you who didn't pick up on the Tasmanian vernacular there, when Beck was saying that her husband came from the mainland, that's what we call the Big Island. It's about 260 kilometres north of us.
True. That's true. We don't care much about them, to be honest. The desert people.
So it's interesting to see when you get to sort of compare these wines side by side. You can see a little bit of that more bunchy character coming through in the Tamar Ridge. where ours has got a little bit more of that sort of strawberry fruit character and a little bit more of the floral sort of lifted notes as well.
The same vintage?
Yeah, same vintage. Yeah,
okay.
and sort of similar clonal mix as well. The main difference, obviously, apart from oak, they're both about 20% new, but I'm not sure what Cooper's Tamar Ridge use. But yeah, the expensive ones. But it's interesting. We're only about 5 k's apart in terms of our vineyard sites.
Quite very different styles. Yeah. Okay. Oh, very tasty.
Delicious.
Excellent.
All right. I reckon you're up next. I get to stay quiet for a while.
No, do we? Oh, right.
No, Chromy's next.
Oh,
sorry. Sorry.
I better talk about some. I need to tell you a couple of things. So the booklet says that this is a 2018 wine. The booklet lies. This is a 2017 wine, and so this is probably a good opportunity to tell you about the 2017 vintage, which, if you're an accountant, was not much fun. If you're a winemaker, it was a pretty interesting vintage. So we had some of the worst frosts in 100 years. So some of the fruit was pretty badly affected. The crops were quite low. We had windy flowering, so we had some, again, low crops. Where our vineyard is, we didn't have any particular frost issues, and I think none of you would have had frost in 17 either. Yeah. So when I say frost in 17, that actually would have been frost in 2016, affecting the 2017 harvest. But just to give you a perspective, the yield in 2017 from our vineyard was about 55 to 60% of what it was in 2018. So just a bit over half of what it was in 18, and about this, half of what it was in 16 as well. So small berries, small crops, quite concentrated, relatively cool season, so slightly elevated acidity, and with the small berries, quite intense colour, some firm but fine tannin. Now, Beck is a little more prepared than me, so she actually read the map and could tell you what number the region is. But we're at the bottom end. If you have your map anywhere in front of you, this region here, which you can't see from what I'm pointing at you, just there's a river at the top of the island, the Tamar River. Beck's Vineyard and the Tamar Ridge Vineyard are right near the mouth of that river, right near the Bass Strait, which is that stretch of water between Tasmania and Australia. The Josef Chromy Vineyard is completely at the other end of the Tamar River. We're actually south of the river itself. So we're about 45 or 50 k's south of your vineyard, Beck. So obviously further inland, slightly higher altitude, quite different soils. So we have a mixture of sandy clay loam, some black cracking or self-mulching clays. But most of the soil for this Pinot is a thin, almost sort of veneer of black clay over some ancient sort of dolerite-based gravel. So we're actually, our vineyard's surrounded by 3 quarries. So essentially, the vineyard sits somewhere where they literally dig up rocks to make roads. So the southern half of our vineyard is defined by the amount of rock and the shallower soil. Now, there's been a few questions about clones, so I will tell you with nearly 100% confidence that this is about 55% MV6. The majority of the rest of it is 115 with a smaller amount of 114 and D5 V12. This is 100% from our estate vineyard. It is harvested probably about 10 days later than Beck. So being that bit further south, bit further inland, we have much cooler overnight temperatures. The daytime temperature doesn't really get any warmer. It may be a degree or so warmer, but one of the defining things about the Tamar River is that up at the mouth where Beck is, where Tamar Ridge is, there's an afternoon breeze that comes in, and even though you should be a warmer site, it's not that much warmer because you cool off in the afternoon. But still, as I say, we'll harvest on average a week or 10 days later than Tamar Ridge. This is roughly a third whole bunch, and then the remainder destemmed on top. Majority of that are being 5-ton open-top fermenters, then pressed, light settle into barrel, and in those barrels for between 10 and 12 months, depending on the season. Malo and barrel. This wine, unlike the Tolpuddle, and I'm not sure about the Tamar Ridge, this wine is filtered. Moderate sulphur. There would be no fining in this, and to me, the thing that defines the southern end of the Tamar Valley is a slightly brighter acidity and brighter red fruit flavour, and tannins that are a little bit softer or finer. I'm not trying to make any judgment call. Like these are both beautiful wines, but tend to be, if we're looking at wines from the same vintage, the Tamar Ridge and the Holm Oak would normally be a bit more powerful, a bit more tannin driven than the wines from the southern end of the valley.
Yeah.
Would you pick similar between when you two picked in a different time? Like, were you earlier than Beck, you think, than Jeremy?
In terms of like the brightness level?
Yeah, would you, like, generally, if you're picking, would you start harvest earlier for table Pinot, in everything else being the same than Jeremy?
Yeah, but I mean, I guess it depends on what we're trying to do. So with our estate Pinot, we're picking like, under 13 Beaumet and trying to get those really nice sort of bright, elegant styles, whereas our reserve Pinots, we want to be a bit riper, so we'll pick them a bit later. So it really depends a little bit on
what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have slightly warmer, growing degree days, maybe slightly more.
Yeah. We're probably talking 50 to growing degree days between the two sites.
Difference, okay.
Christine Austin says she remembers tasting this with you fondly in person.
Oh, excellent. Hi, Christine. It tastes even better now.
And it is the thing about Tassie, isn't it? Like, the wines do, I think the Pinots, they are ones that enjoy a bottle. They've got a year or two in the bottle to start to show a bit of what they are. Yeah.
So when we first started making these wines, I guess to give you a very background in 50 words or less, Josef Chromy is a guy who's about to turn 90 in about 30 days. Joe started this vineyard, he planted that from scratch, and he used to own this vineyard. No, sorry, not the vineyard.
Which one?
Sorry, we didn't have Bayfires. Sorry.
No.
Yeah. So Joe has a long history in the wine industry in Tassie. When we first started making wine, he was actually pretty good. He said we have to age all of our Pinot for at least a year in bottle before we release it. And there's not many people. I'm sure the Sherwin Smith guys, and I know I'm sure Robert Smith is the same. All of these wines will look better 6 or 12 months after bottling, just generating that extra bit of sort of bottle age complexity and softening the natural acidity. And the acidity, to me, is a really defining part of Tasmanian Pinot.
Absolutely.
It helps give it freshness and longevity, but it also means that it evolves beautifully with time in the bottle.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the acidity for me in Tasmania is key. I think you'd see that across all these wines. If you had to define Tasmania across all these different things, then you see acidity was something that really defines us in our against, say, Victoria or Western Australia or Adelaide Hills, where they don't have the same sort of finesse.
Yeah, you get that really fine sort of flinty acidity down here in Tasmania, and I generally pick based more on acidity than I do on on sort of sugar levels, because that sort of gives me a better indication of where things are at. And it's certainly a feature in all of the wines that we make, is that really nice sort of light flinty acidity, which you don't tend to get elsewhere. And I remember I used to make wine in Western Australia, and I moved back to Tasmania and I bought some tartaric acid, which we can have here in Australia. And I think I threw it out 10 years later because I never used it. It became bricks. So yeah, it's something that we never had to use.
Never do. That's true, yeah. I remember even in Martinborough, there was like a New Zealanders adding acid was just part of the Pinot program, but never, when it came back to Tassie, not even thinking about it. The pHs are so good. I think that's what helps them live for so long. They're such lovely, wonderfully low pHs, which is very difficult to get in Pinot Noir.
And perhaps one of the things that is worth mentioning at this stage is, when we're talking about acidity, because Tasmania is an island and surrounded by water, we never get extremes of low or extremes of high temperature. And what that means is we don't get incredibly high malic acids. So there are cold places, cool climate wine regions around the world that are quite continental. So they have very cold overnight temperatures, cold winters. They tend to have higher malic acid content. So when you put your Pinot through that sort of secondary malic ferment, your pH shift is far greater than what we see here. So it really is a natural advantage for us in getting that natural balance of acidity in fruit without having to ameliorate it in any way with any additions.
Very natural. Yes, sorry. All right, okay, sorry. We're moving on to, what's the Dalrymple's the next one? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correction to the vintage on that one too. The booklet says 2018. This is also a 2017.
Because I bought the 17, so that's good. Excellent. Thanks, Shirley. So, yes, that is the 17 we're trying today. So I'll just pour it. Sorry.
While Pete's just pouring those, I can just answer one of those questions, which is about oak.
Read that.
I've got glasses. So I think there was a question as to whether what toast level that we use, and also if we're all using the same sort of oak. I think predominantly people are using French oak, but from a number of different coopers. I think one of my favourite things about making wine is actually the oak trials that we can do if we can afford to buy lots of nice French oak. And I love oak in wine, but we predominantly use medium or medium plus oak, but it really depends on the cooper as to the toasting level that you get. And now there's lots of different toast levels in terms of a longer toast at lower temperatures, or a hotter toast at less temperatures. It's and that's sort of what I was alluding to before with having 14 goes at actually making these wines. It's the difference between the same barrel that's toasted at medium or medium plus, it can be quite dramatic. And so if you only get one shot at it each year, you're constantly refining your oak program to be able to get the best out of your wines. And given that we have to order our oak barrels sort of in October for the following vintage, when we've got no idea what the vintage is going to be like, does make it a little tricky. But yeah, you will find most people using French oak, but from a variety of different coopers. Predominantly sort of Burgundian coopers, I guess, but there's other coopers that we use as well. And personally, I generally go for medium toast for this estate wine, and then slightly higher toast level for our Wizard and our Wizard wine. Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and it's all part of the quality process, I guess. French oak. Sorry. So the next wine is the Dalrymple wine. So this is a blend of a couple of regions. We have I take Pinot from 4 different areas of Tassie, mainly for single sites, but we have a vineyard in an area called Piper's River in the northeast part of Tasmania. So it's across from the Tamar Valley, and I guess it's one that people would know. Piper's Brook, the vineyard, is one of the older vineyards set up by Andrew Peary back in the late 70s, I guess it would have been. So it was one of the first really serious large vineyards, and then Heemskirk and Jans, and that story started next door. And we're not far from there. We're just across Dalrymple's across the road, and would have been set up since the mid-80s, so reasonably old, and a vineyard that's still has a lot of those older plantings there, which is fantastic to have vineyards which have got vines of that age, which a lot of Tassie is lucky enough to have. So this is also a blend of a vineyard we own in the Cold River Valley. So it's from an old vineyard called Frogmore Creek. We purchased one of the original ones that was set up, and it's around about sort of 18 years old now, that vineyard, and it's allowed us to sort of have a diversity of Pinot from different areas and to look at doing the single vineyards, but also this is part of the blend. And this wine in particular is almost 50-50 between the two sites, which is interesting because in the north, in the Pipers River area, it's probably one of the coolest regions in Tassie. It's exposed to quite cold air from the sea, and much more than what Beck would experience in the Tamar. And so we're probably one of the later. We're probably picking almost a week, if not more, later than Beck or Jeremy.
You're a week later than me, and I'm a week later than her.
Yeah, so it'd be a couple of weeks. And so we're right at the very end. And because of exactly what you're saying, Jeremy, about that cold air that comes in as soon as it gets hot, a cold breeze, and we're talking about 15-degree sea temperatures. So we're lucky if we get temperatures close to 30. We'd be lucky a warm day for us in summer would be 25. So that sort of dictates our style, and we get more in that sort of reed cherries and spices, and definitely the acidity is a big part of the backbone. And then it's blended with the Cold River Valley, which is quite the opposite, a lot drier and warmer, and gets into quite, in some days into the mid-30s, and produces blue fruits, and Jeremy was saying before, that sort of more finesse, a little bit of cola, and that sort of Dutch licorice, and these sort of characters, which are, but they come together and meld together quite well. And then the 17, we found it was a really great, they came together as a great sort of blending components, and we was unsure about exactly how well those sort of different characters would meld, it's a real joy to have access to fruit, and you learn so much about Tassie from that. But apart from that, we use similar sort of winemaking. It's whole bunch is probably about 30% in this one for this year. Love the 17. I love that sort of coolness and freshness that it brings, and like Beck was saying, every year is a bit different, and you've got to just adjust to it. And 17 is, we approached this with low yields and a long growing season, and tried to work out exactly what we're trying to get out of it, and was trying to be a little bit elegant and finesse with it rather than punching it and trying to make it more than what it was. And I think the 17s I've seen it's a great example of what Tassie can do in a cool year. So I'm hoping that's what people are seeing out there from the 17s we've seen tonight so far.
What sort of quantity of that wine do you produce?
We would do in total, this would be around about 7,000 dozen, I think, something like that. So a reasonable now, we're pretty reasonable volume of that, and by far the wine that we have the most of. And then our single vineyards are like 200 dozen each, so quite a big step down. So that's our sort of our main Pinot Noir, and that's why we've got it tonight, because it's what you'd see in the UK more than any of our other wines.
And I probably skipped the volume on the Chromy Pinot. In a normal year, that would be 3,500, maybe 3,700 dozen. 2017, it was about 2,000 dozen, just because of the low crops.
Yeah, and we make about 2,000 to 3,000 cases of that Pinot, the estate Pinot.
Okay.
Yes. And just one quick thing, you touched on temperature, Pete. So we've kind of glossed over temperature, and some of the stats will be in your information. But how we get at that temperature is probably something worth mentioning. We said about not getting extremes of high or extremes of low. So during the ripening season, where my vineyard is, the average sort of daily maximum would be somewhere in the mid-20s, sort of 24 to 26 degrees. A hot day would be 27, 28, even 30 degrees, so Launceston in an average year would get between 3 and 5 days that reach or exceed 30 degrees Celsius. And I'm sure maybe Beck's area is a little bit warmer and Pete's area is a little bit cooler. But we really are talking about areas that are very moderate.
Absolutely. No, there's no peaks And that's why I'm thinking that the cold river, only because it's bizarre that it can get these really hot air, wind that runs down the middle of Tassie and can heat up.
Yeah.
But that's about the only area that can probably do that, to be honest. So it's quite remarkable. But it does for a small island, I guess that's what I'm saying, is it's quite diverse for such a small place. It's only a couple hundred k's long and a couple hundred k's wide. So the last wine, Sailor 6 Horse. This is great to have this one because this is I'm going to talk about this tonight. This is down the Huon Valley. So there's a few little bits and pieces down there, and I'm welcoming Jeremy and Beck to jump in on this because I'm not that familiar with the area. But I have spoken to the winemaker today, and this is dry grown, so there's no irrigation on this vineyard at all. Their yields for this in 17, I think, were 2.6 tonnes per hectare, so extremely low yielding to the point where I'd be crying if down at that level.
So pay lots of money for this.
But it's dedication, and it's sort of people who are dedicated to making really great Pinot, and they can irrigate if they want, but they decide not to. They want their vines to really work hard and get the moisture from what's available. They have a little bit more rainfall down there, around about 700 mils. But they are experiencing climate change for the good and the bad and the worst. It's a bit drier, but also can be a bit warmer, which they actually enjoy down there because it's quite a cold area. We're cold in the north because of the cold air, and they're cold in the south because of the latitude, and also they are experiencing cold southerly air down on that valley. So they're in a bit of a about 60 metres off the river, but from there making very distinctive wines, and there's a number of producers down in that area who are really starting to define their area and making some wines which I think are very typical of that site and that area, and I think really carving a niche out there for Pinot Noir.
So I might just chime in with a couple of things about the Huon Valley, because 20 years ago I used to be a contract winemaker, and I would make wine for more different vineyards than I would care to remember, and quite a few of them were in the Huon Valley. So I had significant experience. So if you look on the Coal River Valley to the east and the Derwent Valley slightly to the north of Hobart, they both sit in the rain shadow and the wind shadow of Mount Wellington, which is sort of the defining geological feature down there. So they're dry, protected and warm. As you come south of Hobart, down the river, down the Don Fracastor Channel and down into the Huon, you have a little bit less protection from the mountain, so slightly higher rainfall and a bit more wind, but a lot more influence from the Southern Ocean. So much cooler, and some of these vineyards will ripen a month later than you'll be in the Coal River Valley. So we're talking quite marginal region. So the biggest thing that's happened in the Huon Valley in the past 20 years is people have really found the best sites and focused on those. So one of the things that has stuck with me for almost as long as I've been making wine in cool regions is you want to find the warmest site in the coolest region to make some of the most interesting wine, and that's what these guys have done, and a couple of others in the Huon Valley. So yeah, really interesting wines, but one of the few regions that are probably less troubled by global warming than other wine regions around the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's true. But fantastic. I mean, just so nice to see another diverse region in Tassie.
Yeah. And I think really highlights Tasmania is a single region, but we have an incredible amount of diversity. I mean, even within the Tamar Valley, I mean, we've looked at 3 wines today that are within 50 kilometres of each other and quite distinctly different. But then we've looked at another couple that are 200 or 250 kilometres away, and I think highlight the diversity of soils, of rainfall, of climates. It's an island that I'm sure we have still not yet discovered all the greatest sites.
Correct.
There's a question from Sarah Ahmed about whether or not that may become more formal, those sub-regions may become more formal at some stage in the future?
I think I've discussed this with you in the past, Sarah. I think one day, but if you look at Australia makes a reasonable amount of wine. Tasmania makes somewhere between 0.5% and 1% of the total volume of Australian wine. And you've all tuned in to see me ramble shit and two sort of more erudite and intelligent people tell you interesting stuff about Tasmania. So you're genuinely interested and probably want to know some of the sub-regional details. I think that modern Tasmanian viticulture is really only 50 years in. I think for the majority of consumers, it's probably too early to tell that story. But we love telling that story. We love telling the intricacy of our own vineyards and our own sites and sub-regions. And we will continue to tell those stories. But I suspect it will be after I've retired that those classifications or sub-regions become formalised.
I agree.
I mean, I think it's one of our strengths that we sort of collaborate together as Tasmania, and not just from a wine perspective, but from other industries as well. And that's what I love about being in Tasmania. And then if you sort of set us up, because we're into 6 different little regions that are then sort of almost competing against other but don't have any sort of size, it'll be quite challenging, I think. And I think, like these guys said, down the track we might get to that sort of point, but, Tasmania at the moment crushes around 15,000 tonnes. You split us up into 6 little regions, it's going to be quite challenging for us all to tell our stories separately.
We've done the number of tastings amongst ourselves with regional, where they've all, and we haven't been able to, I don't think any of those tastings seen anyone who's been able to pick a definitive region and thinking you have to guess which region was which, and it hasn't worked at
I've embarrassed myself many times.
Many times back to the point where everyone stopped doing it because it was just like, well, we're not quite there yet. So there's got to be a few more years to really define a region and people to say, something strongly characteristic before we start to head down that track.
I think we can give some gross generalisations about characteristics of different regions. So I would say that the Tamar is warmer, deeper red fruits and fuller grain tannins than the Coal River Valley, which might be more floral fruits and finer grain tannins and a bit brighter. And we could go into all the different regions and tell you gross generalisations, but like Pete says,
I haven't found it yet.
Yeah.
No, anything burning there, Cheryl Lee? I can see you.
No, we're good. We're out of time, I think, unfortunately.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
So if we are out of time, I would like to thank all of you for attending. I would like to thank my co-presenters for providing far more detailed information than me.
Thank you for the house, mate. Well done. The venue.
Yes. Welcome to my house, sorry. And you can rest assured that this beautiful Tasmanian cheese and salmon and terrine will not go to waste now. We'll finish these bottles this evening. But I'm sure that there will be further questions, further information required. So please don't hesitate to contact Camilla and Laura at Wine Australia in the UK, Cheryl Lee from Wine Tasmania here in Tasmania. And I don't know if the contact details of any of the three of us have been provided, but we're not that hard to find.
No.
We've got websites, and I'm sure these two have social media. I avoid it like the plague. But look, it's been quite a bizarre thing talking without actually seeing any of you and having any feedback. But it has been a genuine pleasure to be able to present 6 fantastic Tasmanian wines from a couple of different vintages. And we would, I'm sure the three of us all look forward to when we can come back and visit in the UK.
Correct. And do it for real.
Because we have been island bound for nearly a year now.
Yes, probably.
So, yeah, we look forward to seeing some or all of you in person in
right.
hopefully the near future.
Come to your island for a change. It'd be lovely. Excellent. No worries. I think that's us, huh?
Yeah.
Bye.